So here we are. If everybody can see that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We want to take a moment to welcome you all. This is so exciting. Thank you so much for participating in the Shift conference programming today. This event is, as Lisa said, titled More is No More, Combating Assumptions and Prioritizing Process and Reflection in Our Present Moment of Remote Instruction. We are your hosts, Meena, Khalili, and Ditmeyer. And we're so honored that you're here with us today. We want to acknowledge that this is not easy. From living through a worldwide pandemic to continuing the fight against systemic racism and social and societal inequities to the loss of jobs and childcare, there's been a lot going on in the world recently, but more to the point, there's been a lot going on in our minds and in our own homes.
So hi, I'm Anne, and when Meena and I first hopped on a call together, we acknowledged all the invisible work that goes into teaching, which honestly gets tripled when it's taken online, as well as the fact we can no longer complain because it looks like we're not doing our jobs, and we have students who follow us on social media now. The exhaustion and overwhelm of teaching is also something we wanted to address today in our discussion of More is No More.
So before we get too far along, allow me to introduce myself. I am Meena Khalili. I'm co-chair of the AIGA DEC and assistant professor of design and interaction at the University of South Carolina School of Visual Art and Design. So my teaching style is pragmatic while nurturing experimental approaches. And my research takes a lot of inspiration from my experience as an Iranian American. It moves between design and illustration while exploring user experience, storytelling, language, and type. So I come at this from a traditional, institutional, academic standpoint in terms of this content. And my co-presenter is an independent educator with a great deal of remote experience.
So hi again, I'm Anne Ditmeyer. I'm a design educator, creative consultant, and coach based in Paris, France, where I'm calling in from today. I've taught for Parsons Paris, the American University of Paris, the Institut Français de la Mode, and I've also done a lot of online teaching, and my classes are on Skillshare, Open Classrooms, Adobe, Aquint, and Google's Digital Garage, as well as hosting my own creative workshops. And so my goal is really to help make education more human and more creative. And you can find me online at Prêt à Voyager.
So we're going to start things off with a quick poll here. So Alberto is going to start us with that. So we'd like to begin with administering this poll and asking you, how much experience do you have teaching online? And you should see, great, awesome, look at these results coming in. So you should see a number of options here: never, 1 class, 2 to 5 classes, more than 5 classes. And then as a follow-up, what's your confidence level with teaching online? Is it not at all confident with teaching online, somewhat confident teaching online, or very confident teaching online? So we're going to give you guys a couple of seconds to take a look at that. And we've got a great amount voting here. And we're seeing quite a mix. We're seeing quite a mix so far. Just a couple of seconds there. And Alberto, I'll let you go ahead and end that poll for us to give us results. So excellent. So so in terms of that, we've got quite a mix. We've got about 2 to 5 classes in terms of folks who have experience teaching. And then in terms of confidence, we're seeing about 59% of the people that are in this audience is somewhat confident. And that feels fair to me. And so I'm going to see if we can actually stop sharing that. Alberto, is that possible? And then, okay, I'm going to have to pop out of this. Sorry, guys, just 1 second. Excellent. All right. So moving forward, since we have a great mix of experience and comfort level here, as a room full of designers and educators, we wanted to really take advantage of our collective wisdom. So we're going to be organizing what comes out of this session as a living document and what we're calling a living support document to take away at the end of this session. So a link is going to be posted in the the Slack for everyone to use once that document is finished or to a point to share. So let me take this moment to actually introduce Patricia Childers of City University of New York and David Habbers of Brigham Young University, who's going to be helping us populate that document through what you share in the chat today. We are really grateful to have them as facilitators with us. So some of the things, actually, there we go. Some of the things that you're going to be leaving this session with are going to be a living support document, your ground rules, and then hopefully a mindset shift. And let me pop back to this other slide so that Anne can sort of talk a little bit about the goals that we're gonna start to see.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you all here and that we have such a different range of experience. So we really hope that you all can learn from each other. That's why we want you chiming in on the chat. We want to help create less work for ourselves and everyone through that support of each other and learning from each other. And we want you all to connect and have a good time. So this is, you know, an hour of our lives, but it is just the beginning, we hope.
And so our agenda sort of looks like this. We're going to have about 25 minutes for the presentation. We'll take the breakout rooms for about 15 minutes and then report back and then have the rest of the time for Q&A. And so we're going to ask you questions as we move along this presentation. Your answers are going to be captured. Don't worry if they are perfectly polished. We're going to capture those, and we're just asking that you participate and know that this will be recorded. You can come back to it at another time if you feel like you missed anything as we keep on talking and moving through the presentation. Did you want to add anything to that, Anne?
I think we're good. We're good. We can keep going.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, so let's move forward.
So now that we've kind of set and established some intentions, we're hoping to shift how we think about things. It's an opportunity to do things differently and hopefully better. And as we said, we believe that more is no more for both us as educators and for students. And we talk so much about sustainability in terms of the environment, but in order for education and the future to be sustainable, we have to consider how we take care of ourselves as well. So we've broken this down into 5 areas that we feel need to shift. And so we created a framework inspired by this virtual summit where we've broken down 5 considerations, and we'll look at them in a minute, one at a time, and ask you to reflect on each of them in the chat. But just to give you a little overview, they are to stop overcompensating, help, which means ask for help, ideate and get experimental, foster reflection and sharing, and take the time to grant permission.
So let's dig into each one of these a little bit. S is for stop overcompensating, that less really is more. And so one of the questions that we have for you here is, what strategies have you used to keep yourself from being overloaded? And so we're asking you to answer that question in the chat here, and Patricia and David are going to be culling the chat. So take this moment to answer that question in terms of strategies to keep yourself from being overloaded.
So as you're responding in the chat, you know, try to keep your answer short. Think of it as a tweet. Just get quick ideas out there. Again, you don't have to be perfect. We're just trying to learn from each other. But we have this mindset myth that like more is better, and this idea that we need to get our money's worth. And the more time a student spends with the material, the better they'll understand it. And students need more projects to make up their grade. And that I'll look like a failure as a teacher if I take the easy way out. So there's this myth that more is better. But we want to say that the reality is that busy is not a badge of honor. Even before a worldwide pandemic, everyone was overloaded. Now it's heightened being on the screen, and more is not better, and more is no more.
I'm seeing such great stuff in this chat. Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, hey, Bijan, I see you. Okay. So one of the things that I want to point out is that in the university, in our university at USC, when we learned that we were going to be online for the duration of the spring, a common reaction that I heard from my students, from their professors, was to pile on more lectures, more readings, more homework. This overcompensation really just wears everybody out really freaking quickly. Teachers wear out from overproduction, from grading, and students wear out from intake and response. So I've adopted an acronym for these days, and we actually even use it in my house. It's GFN, which means good for now. In the video demonstrations, am I super polished? Are they unedited? Maybe not. Do I stumble over my words? I definitely do. And that's really okay. Finding ways that work for us. Office hours only during your child's nap time, that's me. It's all good for now. So the reality is that we as students and educators cannot do all the things and cannot be all the things all at once. And acknowledging these professional realities of balancing life and work can only help to normalize those needs for that balance in the next generation of designers.
And I just want to reiterate everything that Meena said. As I prepared to teach a month-long design thinking intensive this summer, I talked to a lot of educators here in Paris, and the exact same thing was coming back with the reaction of students feeling like they were getting extra work because we were going online. And so just that overwhelm. So with our framework, we want to make sure that we are granting you permission at the end of each one. So we want to grant you permission to do less, but do it better. And we want to remind you that it is not cheating. And this often might mean taking more time for yourselves, or taking a walk, or something that feels like a luxury. But you have permission to do less.
So the next one is help, ask for it. One of the myths that we sort of adopt is that asking for help makes you look weak, or like you don't know what you're doing. And in an academic setting, this can feel especially difficult for those of us who are not tenured. But the reality of this is that asking for help before it's too late shows responsibility and proactivity, and acknowledging the truth of being a lifelong learner is a desirable attribute for any team member. It shows a level of trust that people respect. So both teachers and students are resistant to asking for help, but they feel the need to be experts on everything. So both parties often need several nudges in order to take advantage of asking for help, and often wait until it's too late, as they feel the need to have polished ideas in order to speak up.
So a question for this consideration in our framework that we want you to respond to in the chat is, what are some unexpected ways you've asked for help and it's paid off? So as you're responding, I'll tell you a story from my recent summer teaching. So, you know, early on during the pandemic, we knew that my course might have to go online. And so as soon as I knew that was a possibility, I knew that I wanted to make sure I had guest lecturers so that students could hear from other people than myself, knowing we couldn't take field trips. And I have an incredible network around the world and have fostered these relationships, but I felt this immense sense of guilt asking people to do one more thing. But much to my surprise and delight, so many of my guest speakers felt honored to be a part of it. They loved the questions my students asked them, and many of my guest speakers were people who aren't in academia. So this was so refreshing for them and something they wanted access to, and they've been craving all the same. And they were grateful for the opportunity. Some wrote me personal messages later saying that's exactly what they needed, how energizing it was, how it helped them overcome their own imposter syndrome through the experience. And honestly, as an educator, I learned so much from my guest lecturers. It felt like a masterclass for me. So I was learning just as much. So this being said, our permission for you is to just ask.
So the next one, consideration that we'd like for you to have is to ideate and get experimental, just to try new things. Our question here for you is, what is the most fun, unexpected, or craziest thing that you have done in the classroom?
Yeah, talking online here to keep the spirit. So we have this myth that school has to look a certain way because it always has been that way. But the reality is there is no better time than now to question how things have always been done and to try new things and be experimental. We have to remind ourselves that not everyone learns in the same way, and school can be fun and enriching. And there's again, some great answers coming in the chat, which we'll be compiling in the document to share with everyone later. But my favorite thing that I've done with students on Zoom is I make them bring their own blindfolds. I blindfold them, send them into breakout rooms for an active listening activity. And everybody smiles and laughs and they get so much out of it. So that's been super fun for me. And then they have stories to tell everybody else afterwards. So our permission to you on this section is to try new things, experiment with different ideas, play, and really consider experiential learning and alternative, more creative ways that students may learn. And keep in mind that some of this stuff is what's really memorable and will stick with the students long after your class.
So the next consideration is to foster reflection and sharing. One of the myths that we have adopted is that somehow sharing thoughts and feelings is light and not rigorous academic learning, that reflection is somehow not integral to learning. But a reality is that some of the richest material and learnings can come from those moments that we pause and reflect. And there's a mental load when students learn something new, so they need time to process. Rather than learning from the teacher, the students are also able to learn from each other and their experiences, and we can foster that process through technology using chats and virtual group meetings and events. So we don't have to lose that. Reflection can also allow for those aha moments that really evolve when the students are not looking or seeking for answers from the teacher at that time. So one of the questions that we have for you in terms of this consideration is, in what ways do you build in time for reflection in your courses? So for me, one story that I can offer is that reflection is built into each one of my my projects in each one of my courses. I have weekly assignments that are built around the idea of reflection for all of these courses, and sharing experiences among students in a program, physical experiences among students in a program may be something that we feel we're concerned with losing as we move into more digital spaces. For instance, allowing the sophomores to learn from seniors, or the first years to learn from the second years in a program. So one way that we've been combating this in the graphic design and illustration program at U of SC to do these monthly meetups. So I encourage your colleagues and students to hold informal virtual meetups to continue to foster those relationships outside of a project-based space or classroom atmosphere, so that everyone can have that time to reflect and have that discourse.
Yeah, and I want to just agree with everything Meena is saying. And I want to point out that one of my goals as an educator is to learn as much from my students as they learn from me. So making sure that I don't have to fill all the time of me talking. So on this note, we want to grant you permission to take pressure off of yourself. Make the students carry some of the load through sharing their thoughts, reflections, and takeaways. And make sure you carve out time for that. It's the first thing that gets cut, but make it a priority. So in our framework, the last one is to take time to grant permission. So we need to rewire old ways. We have this myth that failure is not an option, but the reality is failure is learning and it leads to success. So we have two questions for you here. The first one is, in what areas have you observed students seeking permission? And then, as an educator, where do you think you can grant yourself permission to try something new?
And I know those are really, really hard questions. So we're hoping that you can battle with those in the chat. And I'll offer this story. I teach a class that is really sort of steeped in this concept of failure. Students really, so they begin the course very aware of the monumental task that's in front of them. I paint a very clear picture the moment that they walk in. And for the first half of the semester, they just work on learning how to fail. So contrary to how that might sound, the course has a 100% success rate, and most students complete it with portfolio-ready work, and more importantly, a new sense of confidence in their ability to create effective, equitable solutions. So the permission that we want to grant you with regard to this consideration is to create ground rules that support your style of teaching and help manage expectations for what you want out of any given class.
So as a quick recap, here are our 5 considerations that we want to invite you to keep in mind moving forward. Stop overcompensating, help asking for it, ideating and getting experimental, foster reflection and sharing, and take the time to grant permission. So some of the ways we've been able to fold these into our instruction is to adopt a growth mindset and come up with a series of ground rules to help encourage students within a learning environment. So Carol Dweck is a sociologist who wrote the book Mindset, where she explores the ideas of fixed and growth mindset. And we'll be sharing an article at the end if you're not familiar with her work. But basically, fixed mindset students want to make sure they succeed in order to seem smart. Meanwhile, those with a growth mindset want to stretch themselves, and their definition of success is more about being hungry to learn, even if it means failing. So we want to keep these ideas in mind of the growth mindset as we establish some ground rules to carry into our courses.
So we are going to go ahead and send you all into breakout rooms at this point. And that's going to take about 15 minutes. And what we would like to do is have you designate one person in each of your rooms as the person who will report back. And we would like to ask that you discuss these two items. So the first being, what are some ways that you can promote a growth mindset in your courses? And we would also like for you to try and go ahead and come up with those top 5 ground rules. We understand you all don't teach the same class, but something that you might consider as a group that you could take into your classroom and use as ground rules that help support based on what we've talked about today.
Yeah, so before we send you off, just really, I would focus on what you want to bring back is those 5 ground rules. If you have more to share, you're welcome to share that in the chat so we can collect it and add it to our document. But, you know, come up with those 5 ground rules, you know, short, quippy themes. We kind of want to look and see if all the groups come up with similar ones or different ones. And anything that's not in your top 5, write it down, save it for you. You can take it into your own classroom. You can have more than 5 in the real life, but in the real world. But just focus on getting it down to like 5 key themes that really surface for your small breakout room.
Thanks. Oh, great, guys. Okay, so we're starting to see some folks coming back. This is excellent. So what we'd like to do is sort of open up the floor. Anne, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, share, like whoever your scribe was, make sure you're sharing in the chat. But if we could have a couple volunteers, representatives from your group, you know, we'd love to hear from some actual voices. I see that Prescott has raised his hand, so maybe we start with that. And we'd love, Meena and I were not in the rooms, so we'd love to hear about your experiences and the process as well.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. So we had a quick chat about some of the possibilities, right, for both for growth mindset and the ground rules, the sort of first principles. So in growth mindset, we talked briefly about this idea of testimonials and how like one thing that folks could do is record a video with their teaching assistant. And usually the teaching assistant has taken the class previously. So then you could say, hey, what was it like for you being someone that's very close in age, maybe even one semester beyond? And then they can give you the long arc view, and they can say, hey, here's what this class is all about over the course of 15 weeks, not just today's module. So opening the mind a little bit about what it all means, because I know folks can get sort of tunnel vision. It's just like, what's due this Sunday? They don't want to hear anything else. So having a testimonial helps. And then we sort of talked about, for the ground rules, let me just get these out there. We kind of brainstormed about first principles and terms that we could come back to. So we had, I'm reading from that screen, use your resources. So not only books, but people, professors. Use your powers of observation, which is kind of like lowercase r for research, of like, if you're designing a magazine, better go get some magazines and like figure this out. Start loose, especially with multiple ideations and sketching. This is a habit that I think even seasoned pros need to remember. Yes, and this idea that if you have a thread or you have a kernel of an idea, like it should be, okay, keep going, like pile it on and start adding to it. And especially as peers, they can do that to one another. They can think of the next iteration, the next step. 5, we had consider other people as a simple empathy underpinning everything. So no matter what we're doing, it's just like, hold on, take a sec. Who's else involved? And then learn to listen. So maybe that also contributes to empathy, that one of the skills of a designer of any discipline is taking it in and listening to the goals. And so those are a few that we just cooked up off the top of our head.
These are so amazing, and thank you for sharing. I'm going to chime in with 2 quick things. So I didn't have a teaching assistant with my 22 students, but I found that inviting alumni into my classroom who had even taken other classes, one was a practicum in India, like the students were just like, you know, biting on it because they could relate, and then see the long journey. Because again, like that beginner's mindset and being okay, being uncomfortable in those moments. So there's that. And in your rules, I was also thinking, for me, like really encouraging like introverts to speak up. So considering others. So it's like when we talk, but when we're quiet. So I think that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah. And the other funny thing about alumni and guest lectures, like you were mentioning earlier, is that, and it's actually funny, I'm editing the tape of Meena when she was a guest in my class, that you say the same thing every week, but somehow if it comes from a new face, students are like, oh. So just reinforcing the core principles.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to have those other voices other than yourself, because again, you said it right there. You become a broken record.
So some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat, and the chat is like so rich, and I have been lost in the loophole of this for some time now. While y'all were in breakout rooms, I was reading through so much of this. But you know, I'm seeing a lot of Jason Dilworth had mentioned, you know, having the students play part in establishing the rules. So I'm sort of wondering, you know, if Jason wants to speak up, or if we want to hear from other people who thought about putting the students first in front of the rules, and how that might have affected how you went forward from there.
Yeah, I can speak up for our group. I think one of the things was so important is just getting sort of the buy-in for them. Students know where they are going to be learning best. They also, I think, expect a lot from our classes, being different from their other online classes. I think that's something in the creative field that establishes. So where do they want to be met? And I think, again, it's always that fine art of teaching is how do you facilitate and help them establish those rules. Really, you're leading them and you can help sort of figure that out. And then I think the other thing is, and maybe it goes into our group's 5th rule, is how do we get the administrator buy-in for when we need to it? Because I think it's a push, like we need smaller class sizes. We need to be able to sort of teach, and that's maybe a bigger thing.
Yeah, Thanks for sharing that. Well, one of the things that okay, so administration, that's a whole thing. But one of the other things that you mentioned, and I rewrote it in the chat, was the idea, the reality that students expect our courses to be in the creative fields to be different from their other classes. So that's a permission grant right there. If we are coming at these courses, I mean, I am right now trying to develop these courses for online. You are too. The overwhelming sense of urgency and the brick in your stomach. I mean, that feeling that I know I'm not alone having that feeling. And on top of it, the loss of childcare or not having things set up for your success, really. There is a lot within that allows us the permission, and there's a lot within what Jason said about students understanding that their courses in the creative fields are going to be different, and they expect that. There's a lot within that is permission granting, and I just want to hold space for that for a second and acknowledge that as we're moving forward with these plans that we're so used to having as August rolls around or as the next term starts for us, whatever that might look like, know that experimentation is something that these students expect. I know they have a hard time with open-ended projects. We all know that. But they do expect things to be different. And Anne, I'll throw it back to you for a little.
Yeah, I'm going to say, so I was teaching Masters in Global Communication students. I had to give them permission to, I had them do sketch notes of videos instead of writing papers. One of their, takeaways from the class is oh, you don't have to write an essay. But I also had to, encourage them to, write outside the lines. And, I had a 31-year-old former military student, have his final presentation be all little doodles he did. So for me, that was, thinking about my barometer of success. But again, it took a lot of nudging along the way. So just push them to be crazier. I have facilitated a couple Creative Mornings field trips, which are a very inspiring place to learn from. I had hundreds of people around the world draw their commute on a banana. Big hit. So go crazy. I want to take us back. We have a couple more volunteers. So Annie Lynn, would you mind sharing?
Yeah, hi everyone. So our group, we didn't get 5, but we got a couple that we thought were pretty important. So one of the things that we talked about for ours was critiques. Critiques are really important, and how to critique effectively. So we talked a lot about critiquing effectively, but without personal judgment. So it's we set the precedent that, and I think a lot of us probably do this anyway, but being conscious of setting that precedent of it's not personal, it's not against you, so they can feel okay, I'm not being attacked. I'm getting more information for myself so I can grow as an artist and I can grow as a designer and a person. So we talked about that. We also talked about the use of language. So using effective language in the course. So one of the things I always do in my courses is we don't say this is good or bad design. We say what's successful, what's unsuccessful, or what are the strengths and the weaknesses, right? So being conscious of the language you're using. So even when you're not, and especially when you're critiquing other people's work and not your students' work, because when it's our students' work, I feel we're more careful with that. But when we're talking about, we're showing them examples or something, sometimes they feel I do this, I saying oh, this is really bad, but not saying that, but being this is unsuccessful. Let me tell you why. And then the last thing we talked about was encouraging collaboration. So encouraging the students to get together, and you guys kind of talked about it too, and having people in the breakout rooms and things like that. So giving them opportunity, all these little micro opportunities, in just the language we use, or how we talk about critique, or how we handle critique, or how we, have them collaborate, especially in an online environment when it's so much easier to just say, okay, the people you're sitting with, those are your groups, but now it's okay, well, now we've got to, actually break out the groups and things, so anyway, those were kind of ours. So we wanted to have students grow that way. So
that's wonderful. I want to reiterate being clear on language, defining terms. I had my students like tell me what design thinking was like as a class, and I learned so many holes in a way I never would have done in a real environment. I've taken workshops with Antoinette Carroll and Project Inkblot, and especially in the design and diversity field, like defining terms when you're working with any group. So like do it with our students as well and have them come back. So I don't want to rush anything. Meena and I have one more slide as kind of a recap because we know some people have to hop off at the top of the hour. But we're going to stay on, and we would love for you to keep sharing. I know we have some more volunteers, so don't run away if you can stay. We're going to keep the room open and keep answering questions.
That's true. So what we want to do is make sure that you get all these resources. If that means that you have to take a screenshot, please feel free to do so. Mute yourself and then do so. And we're going to have these resources also in the Slack. So, you know, I made some bit.ly so that we could at least have something short here, but I will post these in the Slack. We'll, of course, also post our contact info in the Slack for this talk. We are going to be tailoring this living support document to include all of the amazing ideas that we got, even Anne's idea of drawing your commute on a banana, which I've seen her do and is very impressive. And so what we want to do is just make sure that these links are out here for you guys to see before we bring it back into the Q&A and discussion so that you can all see each other's faces, because I hate having these slides up and then not having the gallery view. I think the gallery view is far better. Maybe that's just me. Anne, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, this is all, you know, the resources, they're more, we know that there's resource overwhelm. We wanted to keep it simple. You all have inspired me so much today, which is also part of my goal as an educator at any time. So I know that I'm going to be writing a post on my business blog too. And so like, we want to keep this conversation going long after today, and everything the DEC is doing is working towards that as well. So yeah, but we do want you to stay around and hang out and keep chatting if you are available.
Yeah, and I want to start that. So let me stop sharing here so you guys don't have to see my screen. So some of the things behind the scenes now, a couple of things. Anne, you're on your floor, right?
I'm on my floor. This is where I live do all my workshops, taught 3.5 hours on Zoom every day, connect to my Ethernet. But hallway in Paris, so glamorous, but yes. Yeah. My cushion office.
Yeah, and we still have a hand raised with Rachel, but I want to get to Rachel. I wanted to highlight that just for a second because that's just the reality of the situation. Looks pretty fancy behind you, but you're on the floor connected to an Ethernet cable. Anne and I actually know each other. We've known each other since, gosh, it's been maybe 30 years. I don't know, a long time. We actually went to high school together, but we didn't know each other then at all. We sat at the same table, but it wasn't until we became, I guess, or we're designers in the same field, that we really started talking to each other when we were like in our 30s.
Yeah. And so it's all like an invitation and permission that you never know where like the next like insight or magic moment for whatever you're working on is going to come from. I've met people in Zoom rooms, and Slack, like different chats and just, you know, social media. I use it as a research tool and a way of connection. I don't care about likes, but like, you know, there's that different pool. But it's been such a thrill for me to work with Meena. So I'm honored today to be able to join you because we all can't be in the same place. Yeah. So it's been such a treat and honor.
Same here. Rachel, what would you like to add to this conversation?
Hi, thanks everyone. This has been really great. I'm really thankful for this discussion. I just wanted to share something that I have done in my classes, and we talked about in our breakout room, is that other people had similar kind of ideas. Is a couple of years ago, I switched to having my classes do class agreements. And on the first day of class, we all share in anonymous ways. What do we expect from each other? What do students expect from each other as classmates? What do they expect from me as their professor? What do they expect in a grade? What do they expect in a project? How do they expect to learn? How do they expect to communicate? And from that, we kind of make class rules and we make our ground rules. And I think when I started doing that with my students, it really changed how critiques went, because then they heard from each other about like what they wanted to hear from each other, and they weren't afraid of hurting feelings, or they weren't afraid of, you know, different things. And it also really helped with like me knowing what they wanted from me, what I wanted from them. And it really created a sense of buy-in. And I think now that we're online, I'm going to be teaching 100% remote, that this is going to be even more important to hear from students, like what worked well, what didn't work well for you when you've done online classes, and give them the opportunity to share, you know, what works, what doesn't work, because that then makes them feel like they're part of the class and they're connected and they're sharing those ground rules too. So I just wanted to share that. And I think it also can be very much tied to growth mindset when we talk about like what are expectations around learning? How do you expect to learn? How do you expect to be graded? What is a grade? And you know, a lot of times I would hear from students that they didn't like grades, but they wanted to be able to know that they improved. And so when you start to have the conversation about, okay, well, how do we know when we improve, and how do you know what improvement looks like? That's a very different conversation than like, what is an A? And so I think that's another thing to kind of blend that growth mindset and class rules together.
Yeah, I love that, Rachel. And something that I did that for me, I was because I'm not a full-time educator. I go into courses a few times a year. This, you know, month-long intensive is the biggest I've done, but I used Typeform and I sent a pre-questionnaire of less than 10 questions, so it would be free. And one of the things was like, what has been your favorite moments in online courses, and things like that. So I try to like mimic a professional environment and have them use tools that way. And so incorporating all those tools, and then so I don't have to wait for evaluations. I did plus delta, where it's like what works well and what would you change for the future, in the last class. And then I use Zoom whiteboard and have them draw right on it right there. And so it becomes a little bit more anonymous that way.
Right. So we want to call on Rick Griffith. I know he's had his hands up as well.
Hi guys. Two ideas that I wanted to share. One was that this idea of buy-in and having students be the primary focus. Like I'm a little bit of a broken record with this in the DEC, but this notion of the autoethnography playing a super big role in the classroom, is particularly as storytellers and teaching storytelling. This probably can't be overemphasized from my perspective, because it deals with a lot of equity issues. It deals with a lot of cultural conversations. It allows for whole human beings to show up in classrooms. And as you sort of look at how to spend 3 or 4 hours putting the microphone, however small or large it is, in front of the student and letting them express their story, it seems to me like a critically important part of it. And they can also express their stories through the cooperative writing of rules. So that to me is something very interesting. And then the second thing I have to share is that I'm currently teaching a 20-day intensive, and we built this out of $1.25's worth of MDF on our laser. And it is basically a
Hold on, Rick. I think you're muted. Hold on, Rick. Sorry. There we go.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Sorry. They can use their telephones to capture analog drawings and markings with this tool. So we have a really honest expectation of them working in an analog format and then Dropboxing or sharing their work digitally with us by providing them with this copy stand. And it's pretty inexpensive to make. We flat packed it to them, and then built it in one of our online sessions together. But this keeps them analog. And I think that staying analog in this pervertedly digital space is super important for them. And it was pretty inexpensive to make. And I just offer that notion to you guys.
I love the analog. Plain paper and a marker is my favorite, and having them hold it up, and then to, again, that point of reflection, having them share it, and it helps them get past that intimidation. Rick, I did want to ask, I love the idea of autoethnography. I've just never heard the term. Can you just say one more tidbit of how you approach that?
There are so many ways of looking at the autoethnography as a tool for working in groups. The principal concept is that if you tell your story, then it creates a listening of other people's stories. And as we begin the process of decolonizing design, we also sort of allow for more storytellers, and we allow for the space for storytelling by individuals to be important and primary sources to be important, versus this notion of the already sort of evaluatively safe secondary source. And while Stephen Heller is a brilliant human being and translates many cultural language and brings and breaks barriers down, I think that, young people now and, sort of people of color in the past and in the future need to be sort of given this license with which to approach storytelling. And listening is before writing and before speaking. And I think that helping young people through various autoethnographic tools, sort of approaching it in a very broad way, I think that people can learn how to hear each other.
I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for expanding. My background's in anthropology, and I was like, why was that not day one? And I also think that storytelling is an underrepresented theme, that it's such a great skill for students and adults and everyone to take with them to keep and stay engaged. But it fosters that collaboration was another theme that was coming up.
It also gets us to listen to ourselves. So Rick, I actually use that. I use that practice, but I call it self-generated content. I did not have the term autoethnography, so I really appreciate that being spoken here. My background, I don't know very much about my my heritage when it comes to my Iranian family members. So I've actually had to source out stories from people that I'm related to. But that basically means that I'm doing more work to learn more about where I came from and learn more about the people that I am related to that I didn't know. So there's so much in terms of the constellations that surround the act that you are describing that is so internal and external. So it is in many ways an act that reaps rewards for both the person who is developing those stories and telling those stories and the people who are listening to those stories. Yes. Yes. So we wanted to continue this conversation. We're about 10 minutes over. We understand if you have time constraints, so please don't worry if you do. But we would like to continue this as long as we possibly can. We have, Alberto, correct me. We have until 2:30. Yes. Yes. Okay. So we have until 2:30 for the people who want to stay around and talk. So let's keep opening this up for more.
And anybody who wants to raise your hand digitally, again, it's under the participants panel, and then it pops up, and then on the bottom there should be a raise hand feature.
And Michael Gibson
in the chat.
Michael Gibson makes a good point here in the chat as well, while we're waiting for that. The designers can learn a great deal working closely as they can with anthropologists on their respective campuses. I cannot emphatically enough agree with that statement. Shasti, we're seeing your hand raised if you would like to share with us.
Yes, hi. I cannot express my gratitude and enthusiasm as much as like I have no words for how grateful I am that this is happening now. And I'm really grateful to see some faces, a face in particular that I absolutely adore. One of the best, I think, notions that came up earlier in the chat, and also that came up in our group with Raphael, Jeremy, and Mandy, was this need to, as someone was saying before, to define your terms, right? And one of the most important terms that that we seem to kind of land on was this idea that failure was a very, very important thing to define in the framework of how we view it as an essential component of the process of learning, and how that's inextricably tied to empathy. And so this to create, to invoke one of the things that we were talking about earlier as far as permission, to create permission for failure in whatever definition that our students think failure means, and then to maybe help them sort of escort them into a different definition of failure, where failure becomes something to aim for in terms of aiming high and missing, or aiming high and really pushing the envelope of what capabilities are. Because, as everybody in this conference knows, that talent is not a way to grade a student, right? It's like we don't evaluate our students on talent. We evaluate them on change. We encourage them to embrace process, and more than anything, we're trying to get them to understand that even their limitations become vital parts of their voices. That one of the examples that I bring up is New Yorker cartoons, right? Like the artists of New Yorker cartoons, these are not necessarily people who are the best drawers, right? They're not like, they're not like everything that they make isn't perfect. And the reason that they have such beautiful voices, such recognizable voices, is because those voices are defined both by their limitations as draftsmen, but also by their imaginations and what they bring. So to get our students to kind of retune what they understand as failure being something to transcend, rather than to feel a sense of despair attached to it, as Raphael put it so well, that having empathy for our students in that most important definition, and to really be able to communicate the joy of failing in epic and spectacular ways, is such an incredible, enriching part of that process. So that's what came up in our setting the ground rules. I think that seemed to be one of the most important for us.
And I'm going to add with these, thank you, that was wonderful, Shasti. But
Yes.
With these ground rules, sometimes you need to share them more than once. It is not a one and done thing. It is a reminder over and over, and, let them repeat it when they know them so well that they know them back by the back of their hands. But, that permission to learn and fail, for sure.
We have Ilio. Yeah, another hand raised, Ilio, and I'm apologizing if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Not a problem. I am Elio, yes, and I teach at Columbia College, Chicago, in the journalism program and the communication program. So when we were talking in our group, I just finished taking this class. It was teaching online class that my institution offered for 4 weeks. And I have learned different techniques and different ways of, I have to convert my classes to online for this upcoming semester. So something I have learned is a lot of this information is going to be given in little pieces. And part of that are videos, and videos need to be short, no more than 5 minutes, 6 minutes at the most. That's what the instructor said. So since we have to develop all these aids in order to explain different subjects, let's say typography, color, I mean, I know our syllabi are different and the depth of each course is different, right? But it would be great, instead of each of us developing our own, let's say, color video and our own type video, whatever that is, if we could share those resources, and then, you know, if it serves a specific class, then you can use it, right? Instead of each of us creating and then repeating all these things that we could just share. I'm a firm believer in collaboration, and I know that people talk a lot about it, and it is not that easy to achieve, I would say. Like my students, they say, I rather work on my own. I don't want to work in groups, but we still insist. I really enjoy that because we can share those. And in this course, I learned also things very quickly, how to apply diversity, equity, and inclusion principles within the teaching for people that have different learning styles, or even some ways that they are colorblind, or they cannot read. The videos need to be subtitled, and you know, different other things. But I don't know if this could be possible, but I am willing to share anything that I produce.
I think that is fair, and you know, within our our program, you know, at University of South Carolina, what we're doing is what we're trying to do is share the load. So if we have a speaker coming to one of our classes, because these things are virtual now, we invite the other students in the other classes. So it's not about this mine, and I'm going to get the credit and I'm going to get the points with the director kind of mentality, which frankly doesn't serve the students, and that's really what we're there for. So you know, we're crossing all these boundaries that used to be up very siloed, even within our own program, that we're finding are helping each other out. We're collaborating on documentation, we're collaborating on syllabi, on rules for the classroom, and trying to, and I think this is very important, make it easier for the students to understand when they are taking one of our classes what they will expect in terms of platforms, that we will all use the same platform to deliver content, which I think is very helpful, because we are expecting these students to ping pong back and forth from various professors' tastes and styles, which is very easy to do when you're in the walls of the university and seated in their chairs. But when you're being asked to log into very different places, it is hard to organize for us, much less for the students. So trying to streamline that as much as possible and sharing the load among the faculty, I hope is something that we come out of this continuing to do. Yeah. I know we have another hand up. Anna?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, finally. Okay. I already put some notes on Rorschach Roundtable questions, but yes, it was yesterday, and just before this panel man asked me to repost if somebody will interested, but I want to say something other. You could read that in Slack chat on Roundtable. How it's in practice. I work on small faculty in Montenegro, and very small for American numbers. Like I work with 10 or 15 students at least. And like somebody said at the panel before, our students are not so familiar with writing, with theory. My advantage is, beside I'm teaching history and theory of graphic design. I also teach foundations, fundamental of graphic design and graphic communications, and I use some tricks. I actually planting them to theory all the time from the first year, because foundations are the first year till the end, because the history is on the end year. And for example, for the first year, some of assignments or I don't know, essays and everything are on the level of like I'm teaching in kindergarten, but it functions, that tricks. For example, when I have first introduction class in the first year on foundations, and then I saw that they will have an essay for assignment, they negotiate. But when I see that it will be visual essay, that starts to be interesting, because we find some rules like Timothy Samara or some quote of Paul Rand or somebody else, and they need to find the visuals, posters, books, covers, I don't know, some design who is appropriate for this, and it's interesting. And that somebody in that chat room, somebody said that when they grade each other, it's very interesting, and I think they are motivated, and they saw how hard it is to me to do, and you know, they always said the best marks to each other at first glance, and I said no, it's impossible. Go to the second circle, and now we come on the right level, because history theory are with the master level, and it's different story, because and already.
Oh, Anna, I think it's cutting off. It's a little bit choppy.
Yeah, but we did hear some good things in that, and I also have my students evaluate each other. I think that is a wonderful takeaway from that conversation.
Yeah, I have them after presentations. I use Slack in my classroom, and I have them share takeaways on the Slack channel for each other. But again, I had to give them prompts and really direct that. Meena, I don't know what you're thinking, but I just saw in the chat, Ryan had asked, what happens when you're the only design educator on campus, and how can we keep this energy from this week throughout the fall and those semesters? So,
well, I mean, your design educators community is here definitely to engage with you on that level. I know that that this whole programming was born within like 6 weeks, and if I'm correct on that, Alberto, Lisa's like, kind of that. We were hungry for it too, so we made it, right? I mean, that was the whole deal. And it was a very difficult time to make the decision to pull this all together, especially for those who are working so difficult in the background. I know that Alberto's daughter turns 2 on Friday, and he will still be doing all of this work, you know. So in his off time, he's cutting, you know, decorations for a Zoom party, you know. But these are the choices that we're making. So the community is absolutely here for you. The Slack will remain. Facebook is actually the Facebook discussion group is highly active. So, you know, we can absolutely point you to the various social channels, and please do use those. I also wonder about the designers who might be in your immediate vicinity, even if they are not educators. And I know you might have some thoughts on that.
I mean, my thought is, like, you don't have to do any of this alone. You can ask for help. I love talking to non-designers and just bouncing out ideas. I have an instructional designer friend who I worked with Open Classrooms, called her up when I was like, I don't know how to evaluate this project that I made too open-ended. And I would carry things from different industries. I have a mastermind group here in Paris where it's 6 women from different industries that we check in with each other about every month, but during lockdown once a week, and just kind of have this like close-knit group where you can trust each other. It doesn't have to be 6, like I think we're 5 now actually. And just share those experiences. Like Meena is one of my people because I'm not a full-time educator, and I know that I love how Meena approaches her courses and asks these questions and is doing the work towards, challenging what education is. So she's like somebody I want on my team. We bounce things out around, talk it out. But I have friends who are not educators who, one is a former finance person who switched to UX, and he was so helpful for me in bouncing around ideas. So anybody who's willing to help, and they learn a lot in the process too. So invitation, permission to ask for help, reach out to other people. It might take some time to find those people, but when you connect, you've got your core group.
And if you're in a university, I'm just going to piggyback on that has, maybe a College of Liberal Arts or any anthropology or psychology or sociology, philosophy, any of those types of programming, that is something that I would latch on to. Many of my dear friends now that I've met through university are in those fields, and they actually help my angle, the way that I view designing for life, so much more now than before I met them or had any of the conversations with them. So they spark a lot of interesting stuff for me.
Yeah, I think keeping it cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, no rules, be open to any possibilities, but we're rooting for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for the side tangent. I know that wasn't necessary, but it has been a really challenging couple of months where I am. I live on a farm, a 500-acre farm with 2 kids, and my college, as I'm sure you could figure out from my brief chat, we have had a very significant number of both fixed term and tenure track faculty that have been cut. And if we're not residential in the fall, we are all on the chopping block. So I'm in that position. I'm sure some of you are as well, that you're just not sure that you can do this much longer because you just don't know what's going to happen next. But I appreciate, I've gotten lots of private messages, and I love Slack. I'm grateful that you all are using Slack this week. I use that with my students. Even though our institution doesn't support it, the students and I have decided that that's the piece that we're keeping, and it works for us, so we're going to keep using it. But I just wanted to chime in and mention I really appreciate everybody and all of you that are doing all of this work behind the scenes.
And all these skills that you're going to be able to hopefully take them to your students, but they are life skills and different organizations. And it's about getting creative now. I talk about creative constraints a lot in my work. Living in France, hello bureaucracy, not easy, but made me be so much more creative. So that's also want to give you that invitation and permission to be creative. But okay. I know we have to wrap up.
Yes, yeah, we do. We have to go because this recording has to compress and download. So thank you all so much for being here. Your presence here has been huge in supporting us. We are glad we could offer that back to you. Anne, some last words?
Yeah, sharing the document, it is a gold mine. Thank you all a million. We learned just as much or more from you than what we shared with you. So that's always the goal. And you're wonderful, and keep doing the awesome work.